This is Innovledia.
Hello and welcome back. This is a bonus lesson where I am going to show you how to use the nonlinear deformers in modeling and animating your objects. Alright? So what are deformers? Deformers are high-level tools that allow us to manipulate or drive the components of an object to create new forms by deforming its surface. There are many complex shapes that you may find difficult to model, while at the same time it also takes time. But with the help of deformers, you should be able to model a lot of complex shapes without spending a lot of time. Alright? So let me create a plane. Set its width and height to 10. That should be enough for this demonstration. Now, to deform an object, make sure you add enough subdivisions to the mesh, because the surface of a single polygon cannot be deformed. A single polygon always remains flat, so it has to be a group of polygons instead of a single one. So, let me change the subdivisions to 50. That should be enough for creating an appropriate deformation. Now, I also want to add some depth because currently it is just a plane. So keeping it selected, go to the Edit Mesh and click on Extrude. Pull it up and set this value to 0.15. Go to the Object mode and press 3 to smooth. This is needed for the smoothness of the surface when it is deformed. Okay? Then change this menu set to Rigging. Select this object and go to the Deform menu. Then inside Nonlinear, you are going to find all the deformers that I am going to use in this lesson. Alright? I am going to select this Sine deformer. Activate the Move tool and move it out of this object. This is the Sine deformer, which changes the shape of an object along a sine wave. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let me rotate it first to align the axis of this deformer to this plane. Now, if you scroll down within the channel box, you are going to find these attributes for the Sine deformer. Make sure you have it selected, otherwise you will not find these attributes here. As it deforms along a sine wave, so we have these attributes related to a wave, such as the amplitude and wavelength. Let me set them to particular values to observe the effect. You can see how this object has deformed into a wave. The amplitude sets the height of these waves, while the wavelength sets the length of each of these waves. So, the number of waves will increase if I decrease the wavelength and vice versa. Okay? Now, this deformation would not have been possible if this object had no subdivisions. More is the subdivisions, greater is the level of deformation that you can achieve. Alright? Now, let us take a look at some of these attributes which are common across all the nonlinear deformers, such as this envelope. It works like by how much intensity or strength you want the deformer to deform this object. You can set this value to anything between 0 to 1. 1 means it will have 100% impact on the object, and 0 means it will simply have no impact at all. Coming to the offset, it allows us to offset the position of these waves. If we change it, it will feel like the waves are propagating in one of the two directions. We can definitely use this attribute to animate this deformation, like flowing waves. Okay? The drop-off value is used to create a fade-in or fade-out effect on the deformation. If we set it to -1, the waves are going to fade in from the center of the deformer. Whereas if I set it to 1, the waves are going to fade out at both ends. And if I set it to 0, there will be no drop-off effect. Now, the low bound and the high bound values refer to the bottom and the top portion of a deformer. Since I have rotated the deformer, so the bottom side is now facing that way, and the top side is facing this way. The low bound controls the starting point of the deformer from where the deformation will begin, and the high bound controls the end point where the deformation will end. We can set those positions using these attributes, alright? And these are common across all the deformers, okay? Now there is one thing that you should know, that this deformation is temporary and is not permanent. What I mean is, if I delete this deformer, the deformation on this object will be gone. And also, if I move the object without the deformer, the deformation will change. So, in order to make the effect permanent, you have to select the object and delete its history by going to the Edit menu, then Delete by Type, and clicking on History. This will delete the deformer and make all the changes permanent. Now, we can freely move this object anywhere in the 3D space, alright? But what if we wanted to animate this effect instead of making it permanent? Well, in that case, we have to group the deformer along with the object. Let me undo that. Okay, so once again, here is the deformer and here is the object. We can select them both and press Ctrl+G to group them together. We can then move this group without affecting the deformation. This is one way to make it work. Let me undo it again. Another way would be to use the outliner and drag the deformer on this object using the middle mouse button. This will make the object the parent of this deformer. So wherever the parent will go, the child is going to stay with it, okay? In this way, we can easily animate the deformation, no matter where the object is. We just have to set the keyframes for these attributes here, alright? Let me undo that again and close the outliner. For now, let me make this deformation permanent by deleting its history. Okay? Now I am going to use another deformer. Go to the Deform menu, Nonlinear, and select this Bend Deformer. The Bend Deformer allows us to bend an object along a circular arc. Let me rotate it first, just like the previous one. Because by default, these deformers are aligned towards the Y direction, while our object is resting on the ground. Its entire surface is along the X and Z axis. And that is the reason why I am having to rotate these deformers, to align them to one of these directions, along which it will deform the object. Alright? So let me scroll down and select this curvature value and change it by dragging with the middle mouse button. You can clearly observe how the entire object is bending along a circular arc, and it works in either direction. Let me set it to 180. The envelope, low bound and high bound values work the same way as I discussed earlier. You can try this by yourself. Alright? So I'm going to make this permanent as well by selecting the object, going to the Edit menu, then Delete by Type, and clicking on History. The deformer is gone, and this deformation has become permanent. Now I am going to bring its pivot to the center by going to the Modify menu and clicking on Center Pivot. This is necessary if you want to set the deformer right inside this object in order to deform it evenly. The next deformer that I am going to use is the Twist Deformer. Currently it is aligned to the Y-axis, so I need to rotate it in order to align it to this object. And just take a look how it has been placed right at the center of this object. This is the reason why I set the pivot of this object to center. It is taken as a reference to place the deformer. Okay? So what does this deformer do? The twist deformer allows us to twist the shape of an object. In order to see how it works, we can change either the start angle or the end angle. In either way, it is going to twist the object along this axis. Alright? So, let me set it to something better. And you can also check out these low and high bound attributes, how they are changing the start and end points of this deformation. Okay? So, once we have set these, we can delete the history again by selecting the object, going to the Edit menu, Delete by Type, and clicking on History. Okay? Now this deformation is permanent. We can now move on to our next deformer. Select this object, go to the Deform menu, Nonlinear, and select this Flare deformer. Let me rotate it. Now, what does this deformer do? Flare deformer lets you flare out an object or taper in along two axes. If you didn't understand anything, let me show you what I mean. If I select these two attributes, start flare X and Z, and increase them, you will see this end scaling up. This is called flare out, to grow in size from one end to another. While if I do the opposite, it is called taper in. It means to shrink in size gradually from one end to another. And we can do this on both sides by using these start and end flare attributes. Alright? And if you change just a single attribute instead of in pairs, it will create an oval shape. Okay? Let me reset this to 1. What is more interesting here is this curve attribute. Using this, we can inflate the object like a balloon, or deflate it to create very interesting objects. Alright? The low bound and high bound affects the same way as in other deformers. You can always try this for even more possibilities. We can now delete the history again by selecting the object, going to the Edit menu, Delete by Type, and clicking on History. Now, the next deformer that I am going to use is a squash. Let me rotate it. The squash deformer allows us to squash and stretch an object along an axis. You can increase this factor attribute to stretch the object and decrease it to squash. Okay? You can experiment with these other attributes to find out how they're impacting the deformation. Like this expand attribute, it will expand the portion where the ring is located. And this location of the ring can be changed using the position attribute, which is currently set to 0.5, which means it is located in between the low and high bounds of the deformer. And there are also these smoothness attributes, using which we can add little smoothness to the beginning and end of the deformation. Alright? Now, for the last deformer, I am going to create another plane. Set its width and height to 20 and the subdivisions to 100. Move it out of the grid. Go to the Deform menu, Nonlinear, and select this Wave Deformer. The Wave Deformer is similar to the Sine Deformer, except that it propagates along two axes instead of one. It deforms an object based on a circular sine wave for ripple effects. Let me show you how it works. If we set the values for amplitude and wavelength and change this offset value, you will see the waves are either flowing in or flowing out. While these minimum and max radius attributes work like the low and high bounds of other deformers. Alright? So, this is how we can use the deformers in modeling complex objects and in creating complex animation. Okay? So with this, our bonus lesson is complete. See you in the next video.